Here. So everyone, welcome to our final bite session of this quarter. We will be doing this again in the spring, so don't worry. But as this is our last week of Pro Dev, we figured we'd give everyone a break going up to finals. So thank you everyone who came to come and get your last bit of Pro Dev in, come listen to Meghan, get ready for your professional lives by updating your resume. This is especially crucial because if you're looking for an internship or a job this summer, it's almost the time to start setting this out. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Meghan. And as always, if you guys have questions, toss them in the chat. And I'm sure we will have a Q&A afterwards as well. So thank you, Meghan, for joining us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. Hey, everyone. My name is Meghan Brandow, and I am the Assistant Director of Career Development here at OSU Cascades. I'm going to share my screen because I have a fun little presentation for you today. Let's see. Bear with me while we get up and running. Gotta love the whole two-screen thing. Right. Oops, let's make sure I can see what's going on here. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah. All right. Awesome. So let's talk about resumes that generate interviews. So the reality is when you're applying for a job, you're going to be up against several applicants, right? So the goal here is to make sure that your resume stands out in this virtual stack. So to that end, today we're going to focus on what I like to call a workintation. So sort of a workshop that meets a presentation, because a workshop is meant to really generate discussion and participation, whereas a presentation is more for sitting and listening. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit of both. So without further ado, let's take a look at some interesting statistics. Now, the average corporate job opening attracts about 250 resumes. That's a lot. Having been a recruiter before, I can vouch for that. That's a pretty accurate number. And then out of all of these resumes that are sent in, only about 4 to 6 candidates are going to be interviewed for the job itself. And then, as we know, only one person is going to get the job offer. But these statistics don't have to be scary because, having been a recruiter, like I mentioned, I can give you that inside scoop on what it takes to create an effective resume and how to make yourself stand out. So, top 3 resume tips. The first and most important thing to consider is that resumes are unique to everyone based on your experience. Your experience is going to be totally different from that of your peers. So this presentation will help give you some general ideas on how to format your resume, as well as what information you might want to consider including. All right, so first things first impressions are key. During my time as a recruiter, I have seen many resumes that actually, believe it or not, are pretty much an exact replication of this meme. Don't be this person. Recruiters spend only about 7 seconds looking at your resume. And so you want to make sure that you're formatting your resume in a way that it's clean, consistent, error-free, and easy to read. And research has demonstrated time and time again that, again, the 7-second rule is something that really is valid. And here's an example of the same resume with the same exact content that's formatted differently. So a study was conducted using sensory goggles on over 100 hiring managers, and they found that they spent 15% more time on that resume on the right than they did on the resume on the left. And that's just a matter of formatting. The content is exactly the same. And you can notice too, that they spend a lot more time looking at all elements of the resume instead of sort of just glancing at the top and then presumably moving right along. When it comes to formatting your resume, there's a few basic guidelines that you should keep in mind. First and foremost, your resume should only be 1 page in length. Don't have 2-page resumes, not at this stage in the game. Really, that's reserved for folks who have about 10 years of work experience under their belt and can justify the full 2 pages. Next, your margins should be either narrow, which is 1/2 inch, or I think it's called minimum on Microsoft Word, or the normal margin size of 1 inch around. We want to avoid having anything that's like too crammed together or anything where your text is practically going off the page. When it comes to fonts, we always like to suggest these tried and true fonts, not just because they work well for resumes and are professional, quote unquote, whatever that means when it comes to drafting job search correspondence, but they also play well with applicant tracking systems. So the long story short with that is an applicant tracking system is the software that recruiters use to store resumes. They also use these to post jobs, so on and so forth. And so what happens is the applicant tracking system scans through your resume. And if it can't read the font that you've downloaded perhaps, or that comes on a Mac and they're using a Windows system, it's going to be just a random bunch of symbols, if anything at all. And so we want to avoid, of course, having a resume that shows up as just being Wingding's font. So it's always a good idea to avoid using fonts that you've downloaded, any sort of font that's really hard to read, and anything that's cutesy, like Comic Sans. That's probably my biggest pet peeve on a resume, or any other sort of job search correspondence. And yes, I've been guilty of using it myself. My first resume had hot pink Comic Sans on it, which is really embarrassing. But learn from those mistakes, right? So size-wise, aim for size 10 to 12 point font. Your header should always be a little bit larger in size than the font below it. And of course, the header being your name right across the top. All right, so rule number 2, resumes are not one size fits all. You shouldn't be sending out a generic resume to each different position that you're applying to. Instead, you really need to focus on tailoring your resume to those unique positions. So as you can see here, we have the example of a computer science teaching position against a programming position. Those are going to have 2 very different approaches, right? So you want to develop a tagline as to why that employer should hire you, and highlight relevant education and experience right at the top, and incorporate keywords from the job posting itself throughout the resume. Next up, you want to emphasize your accomplishments. Yes, this meme is a little bit extra, but this is exactly what you want to do. You want to expand upon your accomplishments and not just list your responsibilities. Like, we should never see duties included on your resume when you're listing out what you did, but instead highlight the results of performing those responsibilities, and maybe highlight any responsibilities that were above and beyond your standard job duties. So when it comes to formatting, this is the basic format that we're going for. Like I mentioned, your name should be very large right at the top, because that's going to lend focus to everything that's to come. Next, you'll want to include your contact information. You can leave off your address. In fact, I actually recommend leaving off your address if you are considering moving, because that can sometimes count against you. So a professional email address, usually first name, last name at gmail.com, or something like that. I would recommend avoiding using your OSU email address, because after you graduate, you only have that for about 6 months. You can also include an online portfolio link. I strongly recommend including a link to your GitHub as well as your LinkedIn if you have one, because employers are all about minimizing risk. It's very costly to make a poor hiring mistake, right? Hiring someone who doesn't work out. So what employers want to see is proof that you have the skills that you claim to have. So that's why it can be really useful to include a link to your online portfolio, so that way they can see examples of your work. Next up is the summary of qualifications. This is very different from an objective statement. The way I like to think of this is basically using that old sales pitch in an interview of, sell me this pen. An objective statement, which talks about what you're looking for in a job, is basically like saying, well, I'm trying to sell you this pen because I could really use the commission off of you. That's not so great, right? Instead, a summary of qualifications is about 2 to 4 sentences that capture what you have to offer employers as a professional. So that would be like saying, this Sharpie pen is a fine line pen that does not bleed through the page and provides a smooth writing experience. Much different spin. So that's what the summary of qualifications is. And we'll go in the next slide into how you can structure that. Under the summary of qualifications, you want to list your education. So you'll always do this in reverse chronological order. So OSU Cascades should be right at the top. And if you have any associate's degrees, that can go below. You can leave high school off of your resume. Next, you'll want to include related skills. This is especially important when it comes to pulling things from the job description itself. And this is because that pesky applicant tracking system also has a habit of comparing what's on the job description against what's on your resume. Now, if you fall below a certain threshold of a match, you're going to the virtual trash can, and you probably won't even get reviewed by an actual human being. Now, on the other hand, if you go above a certain threshold of a match, that's when you fall right into a recruiter's lap. And that's what we want to see happen. So that's why it's really important to list out all of your relevant skills that you have for that job. So different scripting languages, for instance, different tools that you know how to use, include those on your resume. You can also boost the odds of showing up in the applicant tracking system by adding some relevant coursework that you've taken. I usually recommend a minimum of 3 courses and a maximum of 8. Next up is where you will put your related work experience, which you can structure in a variety of different ways. If you don't have formal hands-on internship experience or job experience yet, that's okay. You can include project-based experience as well. So let's get back to that summary of qualifications piece. So when you're structuring this, the best way to go about it is to turn back to the job description and take note of the core requirements that the employer is looking for in that hire. If you see anything that's called preferred qualifications or additional qualifications, consider those bonus points. You want to rack up as many of those as possible. So take inventory of what you have in comparison to what they're looking for. And then in the end, it'll look a little something like this. So as you can see here, our sample student, Emily, has listed her address. She has her phone number, a professional email address, a link to her GitHub and LinkedIn. There's also the tagline. So this is what's going to lend focus to the rest of your resume. Now, what I like to do here is just take it directly from the job description. What's the title of the position you're applying for? And then stick it right at the top. And then you can include your summary of qualifications. So I won't read this to you out loud. That's of course redundant, but you get the general idea. Emily is going into her summary of qualifications, describing her skills, her experience, and some of those soft skills too, like being a quick learner, who can also work well independently as well as in a team setting. You can also add other work experience. So any sorts of other jobs that you've held, such as part-time jobs or summer jobs, if you would like to demonstrate some transferable skills from those experiences or demonstrate that you've been working while also being a full-time student, that always looks good in a resume. And then you can also add any activities, volunteering or leadership positions that you've held. So try to keep everything in the same general format. So if you're bolding things in one area, make sure you're bolding them throughout. Same with dates and italics and all of that good stuff. So let's talk about how we can actually go about writing out your experience. In the next slide, we'll go over some action verbs that you can use to add a little bit of oomph to your resume. But here's what we want to do. Begin with an action verb. So instead of saying duties included or responsibilities included, we want to make sure that we're using something strong, such as oversaw or managed, utilized, right? Something like that. Highlight the transferable skills and the skills that are related to the job. So a transferable skill is one that has a place in any sort of work environment, like time management or interpersonal skills. And you should always tailor your resume, like I mentioned, for each position that you're applying to, which means sometimes taking the exact same language from the job description and including it in your resume. That's perfectly fine, and that's going to help you beat those pesky bots. Next, you want to emphasize your accomplishments in the position. So this is where we get descriptive by qualifying and quantifying our experience. So for instance, instead of just listing that you managed projects, you could go into a little bit more detail and describe the number of projects that you helped manage or the scope of the projects that you helped manage. Just to provide a little extra context. When you're writing out your experience, it's always helpful to write things out under the assumption that your reader has no idea what your job entailed. And so generally, when it comes to writing out these bullet points, a good bet is to have about 3 to 4 under each. You don't have to go totally wild and include like a list of everything you've ever done. So when we're thinking about your most recent job or experience, it can be helpful to develop some bullet points considering the following: the action verb that you want to use, the job duty itself, the key details of what happened, and then the outcome. Normally, if we were in a class setting, I would have you go about thinking about what you could do to expound upon your experience in your most recent position. So here's some common action verbs that we see on computer science resumes. Things like analyze, assess, build, execute, develop, right? These are all really strong action verbs. And then you can tie these to a transferable skill. So for instance, authored reusable unit test documents to ensure quality control and identify bugs. Or partnered with backend developers to create dynamic web pages using JavaScript. Leverage strong interpersonal skills to effectively collaborate with graphic design, web design, and QA teams. So these are all different things that you can use. Whoops, I just saw something in the chat. Gotta switch this around, I guess. Here we go. Whoops. Uh-oh. Split settings. Let's switch this. Swap them around. There we go. Okay. So when we're creating these action verbs, again, really helpful just to link the action verb to the duty, the key details, the outcome, transferable skills in there too. So we're going to do a little exercise where we pretend to be recruiters. Like I mentioned, typically you only get 7 seconds. Since you're not recruiters, I'll give you an extra 3. But let's spend about 10 seconds, give or take, taking a peek at each of these resumes and seeing what stands out. So our first one is as follows. All right, so who wants to share? What stands out? People can just unmute themselves there because for some reason I can't see my chat.
We had a software engineering internship from Southwest Airlines, I believe.
Definitely. Okay. Yep. The different font in the top. I'm seeing some answers in the chat, as well as Starbucks experience. What else do folks think?
The bold text on the left side really caught my eye on each piece.
Yeah, the bold text right on the sides. We can go back and we'll take it. Very distracted by the name is another one that I'm seeing. Great. All right, let's take a peek at the next one. All right, what stands out with that one?
Comic Sans.
Ugh, right, Comic Sans, my nemesis. Any thoughts in the chat on that one? Yep, got a few. Lots of unused space. The name was in a bad font. Way too spread out, poor text choice. Bold sections, your eye.
I would add.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add that the alignment of the different sections caused a lot of work for my eye to go from each piece to each piece and find where the things were.
Yeah, that's one where you just kind of take a look at it and go like, oh, no, thanks. Inconsistent formatting, look very short, not concise short, just little detail short. Yep. Awesome. Let's take a peek at the next one. See what the final one has to offer. All right, what do we think about that?
I liked all the technical skills and how they're organized up top.
Technical skills, how they're organized up on top. Feedback says it's good, spaced out, list of skills and knowledge, like its organization. Definitely a better format, saw each section.
Yeah, I feel like it was more like it grabbed your attention.
Yeah, it grabs your attention. Tech skills was spaced out, which leaves room to add more if you have them. Yeah. So when we're thinking about all of these resumes, right, obviously the aesthetics matter. The interesting thing about creating these sample resumes for all of you was that I had all of the same content on each resume, believe it or not. It was the same iteration of that resume, just highlighting different elements. So when you're creating your resumes, think of them as a marketing tool. You don't have to include everything you've ever done everywhere and anywhere. In fact, you should avoid doing that because that's going to make the focus of your resume go all over the place. So instead, we want to really focus on targeting our experiences and skills and education to those specific positions that you're applying to. So is that surprising to anyone? Those were actually the same resume, but just, different things left off or left on.
Yeah, I mean, in 10 seconds, I couldn't. I mean, the first two I could tell that it was like mostly the same. But
Yeah, the first two were a little messy for sure. But yeah, that's I think, really helpful exercise in just seeing that resumes really are all about formatting, right? You see the comment in the chat. It's amazing how big of a difference formatting makes. And it's so true. But really, content is key, but the aesthetics are important. So one way to go about evaluating your own resumes is using VMock. So VMock is a smart career platform that's powered by AI technology, and you have access to this for free using your own credentials. So all you have to do is go to vmock.com/Oregon State, or you can access VMock right through our website, which is osucascades.edu/CDC. So what VMock does, it's pretty cool. You upload your resume and you do get 10 tries per year. So if you are trying to evaluate your resume for a specific job and you're planning on creating multiple iterations of your resume and you want to get those reviewed, keep that in mind. Only get 10 per year. So what happens is you upload your resume and VMock's technology will go ahead and scan it for you. It will go ahead and scan it and give you a numerical grade on your resume. Now, don't stress out because it is pretty much impossible to get a 100. My colleague Jen and I have tried multiple times to break VMock and get a 100, and it's just not going to happen. It always finds something. But it will give you that numerical score, and then it will also put you in some sort of range. So a red range, meaning needs a little bit of work, yellow range, meaning you're on track, and then green, meaning good job, you're in the clear. You should feel good about applying for this. Now I see a question in the chat right now about what should we do if we are low on uploads? Is it possible to get more? Unfortunately, it is not. So it's something where you'll want to be really strategic about how you use VMock. But the good news is you can always make an appointment with me in the Career Center, and I'm happy to look over your resume and work with you on it too. So one thing that VMock was really cool about is it breaks down the score in terms of impact, presentation, and competencies, because you want to make sure that you're including those core competencies or transferable skills on your resume. So that means including things like time management, communication skills, interpersonal skills, making sure you find a way to weave those in. And then it's also going to talk about some ways that you can improve your resume. So whether that's improving your bullet structure, elaborating on your experience, changing the formatting around a little bit, it'll give you some good advice there. All right, so next up, let's talk Handshake. If you're not already on Handshake, you should definitely get on board. It is one of the most valuable tools that we have in our toolbox for you here at OSU Cascades. And again, it is free of charge. So what is Handshake, right? Handshake is a tool that helps all students launch meaningful careers. It's a place where you can access jobs and internships by searching for them. You can also receive a personalized feed with custom recommendations that are tailored to you. Just sort of like your Spotify Discover Weekly that you get, you're going to get the same thing with Handshake, but with jobs. And it's all based on your activity in the app or the website. It's available both on an app for iOS and Android, as well as the web-based platform too. Now, there's a really cool social element of Handshake, where there's students that you can connect with at other schools, and you can message them about their experience, working for a particular employer. That's a very common thing that we see happen on Handshake. There's also a Q&A section where if you were really interested in finding out more about what it's like to work at Apple or at Meta, you could ask other students, you could ask specific questions. It's sort of like a message board, and get really granular feedback, which I think is really cool. Now, I mentioned that you can find jobs on Handshake, but employers can also find you on Handshake, which I think is a great element of the platform. So employers are on there. They are very active with our students and are sending out messages frequently. And last but not least, Handshake is where you can access the Career Center. This is where you can make appointments with us. It's where you can see what events are taking place. And they're not events that are limited to what we have going on, but we see things like Google, for instance, might host a diversity hiring night and will offer like tips on how to get hired. It's really, really cool stuff that we see on there. And in addition, you can register for career fairs. We have some guidebooks that are up there, but just really a great way to get connected with the Career Center. So employers are 5 times more likely to contact you if you have a fully fleshed out Handshake profile. And so they're sending upwards of 16 million messages per year. So this is something that you definitely want to get a jump on. So the easiest way to complete your Handshake profile is by uploading your resume. And hopefully, if you've used those tips that we just talked about, you'll have a super strong resume that you feel confident in. And it'll upload and populate these sections appropriately. You'll always want to make sure to do a double check because it's not always perfect. Sometimes we've seen like volunteer experience populate under like interests and vice versa. But it's just a really easy way to get to 100% profile completion, which is really what we want to see. Now, one section that you'll want to take particular care in is the My Journey section. So this is your professional introduction. And unlike on your resume, and it's sort of like the summary of qualifications section, but unlike on your resume, this is where you can and should put a little personality into it. So when you're writing out your Handshake bio, you really want to focus on the following elements: your education, your experience, your goals, and then some sort of snappy closing. So for instance, my name is Kate and I'm a junior at OSU Cascades. I'm pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science with a concentration in software engineering. I have a year of back-end development experience in the field through an internship with Dutchie, in addition to working in the OSU Cascades Innovation Co-Lab. Through these experiences, I've developed fluency in CSS, HTML, JavaScript, Python, and Ruby, developed knowledge of Agile XP practices, and can collaborate effectively as both a member of a team and individual contributor. My primary goal for using Handshake is to find an internship as a back-end developer. If you're looking for a highly motivated, detail-oriented professional, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So, right, we take a lot of those same elements from the summary of qualifications, like those skills and experiences that she's had, and then integrates it into a more personable, friendly approach. So that's what I've got on resumes and on Handshake. Who has questions or would like some feedback? We can take a look at people's resumes if you'd like. If anyone's feeling particularly brave, we can offer some feedback there.
So, you were talking about the like a robot. I'm not sure what it is, like the program that reads your resume right before like a recruiter will actually read it.
Yeah.
And and so like what would you say out of the resumes that get read from the program get read by like a recruiter? And like also you mentioned like, oh yeah, like font and stuff like that and like certain things. But is it all just formatting, or is it also have a lot to do with like the I think you said the keywords too, right?
Yeah. So that's a great question. When it comes to specifics of like how many resumes get rejected just through the applicant tracking system, it's not something I would know offhand, but I imagine it's a pretty high percentage just based on, my time in the field and going back in and seeing the number of resumes that would get rejected compared to what would come in. So typically, maybe around a third if I were to guess. And then from there, you evaluate the rest accordingly. Now, some things that can make your resume fall victim to the ATS, of course, if you have content that's lacking, that's one thing that often will get you sent to the rejection pile. And that's something that VMOC is really good at picking up on. Most often, it's formatting. And so it's silly little things like if you're using a template, don't use a template. Templates are the worst. So I know it's really tempting to just go on Canva and plug things in because it's already populated for you and it looks really pretty, but they don't play well with applicant tracking systems. And sometimes it'll show up as just a blank page. Sometimes it'll say like invalid file format, really depends on the system that you're using. But templates typically don't play well with applicant tracking systems. Same with those like 2-columned resumes. Those usually end up a little bit wonky too, especially if you're using a text box. Stay away from text boxes on your resume. Those never seem to go in the right place. I would also recommend, again, the font. That's something where it often gets tripped up. Like if you're using a font that you've downloaded that looks really pretty and is aesthetically pleasing, unfortunately, it's always best to use kind of those boring, ugly kind of fonts when it comes to resumes. Other things to consider, like using graphics on your resume, those often don't populate well. So try to stay away from any sort of symbols. Certainly avoid headshots. That's just not something that is the norm right now. Some industries that certainly is, like if you're going into theater, I suppose that would work. Or if you were applying overseas, that's normal, customary in many cultures, but otherwise keep that off of your resume because that can also, mess with the applicant tracking system too. And I see a question in the chat. Would you recommend using Word and exporting as PDF? Excellent question. So keep it in Word. Believe it or not, Doc and DocX are your best friend when it comes to resumes. Sounds really counterintuitive. But for some reason, the majority of applicant tracking systems have a really hard time reading PDFs. The only caveat to that is if you see an applicant tracking system that says upload your PDF as like one of the primary, supported file types, in which case it's probably one that plays a little bit better with that. But I always recommend, upload it as a Word document. If you're sending it via email to someone, that's when you can use it as a PDF, just to keep that formatting intact.
Do you ever see any issues with people going from Google Docs to DocX files?
I haven't really seen too many issues with Google Docs. Usually just as long as it's in that doc format, then you're pretty good to go. And I see a question. If someone knows multiple languages, do recruiters like to see a list of languages you know? Yes, that is always a plus, especially for a lot of technical positions, positions that are front public facing. That's always great to have.
I wonder if that question was in regard to like programming languages or like spoken languages.
Yeah, I'm not sure. At any rate, whether it's programming languages or languages that you speak and write, you should definitely include them. I think that the more the merrier, especially if you are creating a technical resume, really, go wild with including all of the different languages and tools that you know. Any other questions, folks? No? All right. Well, let's talk about some of the resources that we have to offer in the Career Development Center. So, of course, we have Handshake. This is, again, the best of the best that there really is when it comes to career services software. It's student-centric, so you're not going to come across those really annoying job posts that claim to be entry level but ask for like 3 years of experience. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. But this is where you can create your applicant profile. You can search for jobs and internships. There's that whole employer database. You can learn more about companies, see what reviews students have left, sort of like a mini Glassdoor, which is like a Yelp for employers. And you can schedule appointments with us. We also offer guidebooks on our website. So we have them for resumes, cover letters, as well as interviewing. There's access to VMock, where you can score your resume. Focus 2, where you can explore major and career options. This is a really great tool for trying on different titles. If you're already sure of the direction that you're headed toward major-wise. And then Standout. Standout is one of my favorite tools that we offer. It's a mock interviewing platform where you can practice your interviewing skills and just get some really great targeted feedback in return. And you can also choose your difficulty level. You can choose some computer science specific questions in addition to those that are more along the lines of tell me about yourself, or what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses. And the difficulty level piece is fun too, because you can choose from having like a really nice bubbly recruiter to someone who's like, so tell me about yourself, and is really stern and rough. So I think it's a really helpful tool. And the Career Development Center is also here for you as a resource. So it's composed of myself and my colleague, Jen. She is our experiential learning coordinator, and she is awesome. She can help you with finding an internship, job shadowing, volunteer work in the area, micro internships. If it's experiential learning, she's got her name all over it. And she's a fantastic resource too, in terms of all of the work that she does in connecting with companies here in the Central Oregon area. So if there's a particular employer that you have your heart set on, reach out to Jen. She probably has a contact there. And then, of course, my role with the Career Development Center is working with students individually. So what I do is provide career counseling, kind of A to Z. So if you need help with writing a resume, writing a cover letter, interview prep, finding a job, going over that whole job search strategy piece, that's really my area of expertise. And then please feel free to follow us on Instagram. We have a very active Instagram that I have a little bit of too much fun making, but hey, it's full of good resources, I think, and is pretty relevant too. So that's what I've got for y'all today. Let me stop sharing here and we can pop back and see if you have any other questions or things that you want to chat about. No, all good? I know professional
Um,
development is such a fun topic, but
would you recommend like being on social media? I'm not like a huge fan of it, but I think that bosses might check into it. So maybe for
I don't
smaller
think
companies.
it's like a bad thing to not be on social media. I actually personally wasn't when I started my career, and it didn't hold me back. Certainly, you know, socially it was a little weird when all of your friends are on this platform and you're not, but I don't think it's a negative by any means. I think if you do have a social presence, a good one to have is one on LinkedIn. Any other thoughts, questions? Doesn't have to be resume related, could be about jobs and stuff going on.
You know anything about the local job market in Central Oregon? Like maybe like specifically for like tech folks?
Yeah, so we had a really exciting event last term that we are hoping to bring back. It was called the Career Crawl, which is where we went on a little field trip and visited about 5 different businesses here in the Bend area. And we had so much interest from these companies that they want to do another one. There were some that weren't able to join then and want to do another one with us too. But right now we're seeing a lot of activity, especially for technical jobs, and a lot of alums who are interested in giving back and helping current OSU Cascade students. So that's where, you know, if you have your heart set on a certain company, reaching out to Jen is a really great idea, because she's the one that's, you know, talking to folks and finding out what's going on and really has a good finger on the pulse for that stuff. Thanks, Jason. Let's see. And I see a question. Is OSU Cascades hosting a job fair this spring? We are, yes. So we had one recently that was really well attended. So because that was so great, we are bringing it back. We're going to have an in-person option as well as a virtual option. We're trying to align it with the dates that Corvallis hosts theirs. So stay tuned for more information on that. Just because we are very excited and are in the process of identifying some employers. So if you have a wish list of people you'd like to see, please email them to me and we can try to get them in the loop. How often is it that students in the CS field here at OSU are hired at tech companies in the Bay or any major technical city? That's a great question. I just did a report on this. And we have a lot of students who leave the Central Oregon area. Though we do have, the majority stay here, but I have seen a lot of students who have gone out to Austin, Texas, who have gone to the Bay, who've gone to Denver, and who have gone out to Boston, which that was where I was from. That was the technical market I used to recruit in. So if anyone's interested in anything out that way, I'm certainly able to help provide some connections there. Where can I stay updated about the job fair's date? Handshake. So Handshake is where you can learn about the job fair and who will be attending in terms of employers, as well as other fairs that are going on. So there might be other events that Corvallis is putting on virtually that are tech specific. You can always attend those too, but Handshake is where we post all of our major events. And of course, we'll send something out on campus groups once we have a date. All right, y'all. Well, I will give y'all the gift of time if you don't have any other questions or things that I can answer for you today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. That was fantastic. And like she said, guys, the Career Center is amazing. They wrote my resume when I was a freshman, and it's pretty much hasn't changed anything but the stuff inside. So they're excellent. Go talk to them and stay tuned for those job fairs. As always, we always put that stuff out in our servers. So pay attention to those. And we'll try and get a little bit more career focused sessions in the spring, since people are going to be starting to look at like jobs and internships and stuff. So Other than that, thank you so much for attending. Your attendance is what keeps these sessions going. And they're just here for you guys. So thank you all. And yes, it's recorded. I just saw someone post in the chat. The session was recorded. When it hits my inbox, I will put it up in our server or in our folders, then toss it in the server. So don't worry about that.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Hope to see you
Yeah,
guys
of
soon.
course.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank
Nikki,
you.
and thank you everyone. Have a good night.
Take it easy.
Thank
Bye.
you.